My father raised his wine glass, looked straight at me across the dinner table, and said, "You married a poor man. You've done nothing with your life." My 5-year-old son was sitting right beside me. My sister laughed. My mother stayed silent. And then my father told me to leave. So I picked up my son, looked at my father, and said 5 words that changed our family forever. "You will lose him too." I had no idea that almost a year later, the same man who had insulted my husband would be lying unconscious on an office floor, with my husband being the only reason he survived. If you've ever been made to feel worthless by someone who was supposed to love you, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with me. Because this isn't just a story about revenge. It's about what happens when someone finally stops begging for a place at a table that never wanted them there. My name is Mia. I was 31 years old when everything finally changed. My father, Reeve, had built a successful real estate development company over 3 decades. He was proud of what he'd accomplished. But somewhere along the way, success became the only way he knew how to measure people. He looked at someone's house, job title, income, car, and connections, and decided how much they were worth. My mother, Vasna, had learned to survive by staying quiet. My older sister, Rose, had learned to win my father's approval. And then there was me. I became an elementary school teacher. My father called it a hobby with a pension. Then I met Aiden. He was a firefighter and paramedic. I met him when he came to my classroom for a fire safety demonstration. He was supposed to stay for a few minutes. Instead, he stayed almost an hour because my students kept asking questions. I watched him kneel down so he could talk to a frightened child at eye level. That was when I knew this was the man I wanted. My father hated that decision. Aiden didn't own property. He didn't come from a wealthy family. He wasn't a businessman. He ran into burning buildings while everyone else was trying to escape them. My father couldn't understand why I would choose someone like that. A week before my wedding, he told me, "He'll never be able to give you the life you deserve." I looked at him and said, "I want this life." He never forgave me for that for 6 years. I kept trying to prove that my marriage wasn't a mistake. I brought Rowan, our son, to family dinners. I sent my father pictures of his school projects. I told him about my teaching awards. I told him about Aiden's work. He barely listened. Whenever Rose's husband, Sterling, talked about finance or promotions, my father was fascinated. When I talked about my classroom, he changed the subject. I kept telling myself it didn't matter. I had Aiden, I had Rowan. We weren't rich, but our home was warm. We ate dinner together, we laughed, we listened to each other. But deep down, there was still a little girl inside me who wanted her father to say, "I'm proud of you." I just didn't know how badly I still wanted to hear it. Until the dinner that changed everything. It was a Sunday in November. My father had invited everyone over to celebrate Sterling's promotion to senior partner. The table was perfect. The food was expensive. Rose looked like she belonged in a magazine. I brought a store-bought pie because I'd spent the day at parent-teacher conferences. I noticed my mother's eyes flick toward it. She looked embarrassed. That should have been my warning. Dinner started normally. My father spent most of the evening talking to Sterling. Then, during dessert, he turned toward Aiden. "So," he said, "any chance of a promotion? Or are you planning on working those 24-hour shifts forever?" Aiden calmly explained that he was studying for his lieutenant's exam. My father smiled. "It's honest work," Aiden nodded. Then my father added, "It's a lot of work for very little to show for it." My face went hot. "Dad, I'm just being honest, Mia." Then he turned toward me. "You had opportunities. You could have gone to law school. You could have joined the company." He pointed toward Aiden. "Instead, you're grading spelling tests for $40,000 a year and living in a rental house with a man who runs into burning buildings." I swallowed. I love my life. And I meant it. But my voice sounded smaller than I wanted. My father raised his wine glass. "You married a poor man." Then he looked directly at me. "You've done nothing with your life." My sister laughed. Not nervously, not accidentally, she genuinely laughed, and that's when I looked at my mother. I waited for her to defend me. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Nothing. My 5-year-old son, Rowan, had gone completely still. He didn't understand the details, but he understood the room. He understood that his mother had been hurt. He reached over and put his little hand on my arm, and something inside me went quiet, not broken, quiet. My father leaned back. "Get out." I didn't move. "Don't come back for Thanksgiving. We're happier without you." For years, I'd imagined a moment like this. I'd imagined myself crying, begging, asking him why he didn't love me. But that night, I didn't do any of those things. I stood up, I picked up Rowan, then I looked at my father. "You will lose him too." The entire room went silent. I walked out. Aiden followed me outside. He didn't ask me to explain. He simply took Rowan from my arms so I could breathe. That night, when we got home, Rowan fell asleep quickly. The next morning, he came into the kitchen and asked me something that broke my heart. "Is Grandpa mad at me?" I knelt down. "No, sweetheart, none of this is your fault," he nodded. Then he asked if we could have pancakes, so we made pancakes. It sounds small. But it was the first morning I woke up and stopped trying to earn my father's approval. The weeks that followed weren't easy. I missed my family, not the way they treated me. I missed the family I had always hoped they could become. But slowly, things changed. Aiden kept studying for his lieutenant's exam. I started an after-school reading program for struggling students. Rowan started kindergarten. Our home was still small. We still didn't have expensive vacations. But we had something my father's scoreboard could never measure: peace. Then, almost a year after that dinner, everything changed again. Aiden was working one afternoon when his station received an emergency call. A man in his 60s had collapsed inside a downtown office building. He wasn't breathing normally. Aiden and his team rushed inside. The moment he saw the patient, he recognized him. It was my father. Reeve had collapsed during a business meeting. His heart was in a dangerous rhythm. Aiden didn't hesitate. He didn't think about the dinner. He didn't think about the insults. He didn't think about the fact that this man had called him poor. He simply went to work. He treated him, stabilized him, and stayed with him during transport. My husband, the man my father had considered beneath our family, was fighting to keep my father's heart beating. Aiden called me from the hospital parking lot. "Mia," his voice was still shaking with adrenaline. "Your dad collapsed." I sat down on the kitchen floor. "Is he going to be okay?" "He's stable." I closed my eyes. Whatever my father had done, I had never wished him dead. I only wanted him to see me. I wanted him to see Aiden. I wanted him to understand that the life he considered worthless was actually full of love. My father survived. 3 days later, he found out who had saved him: Aiden. The son-in-law he had called a poor investment. The man he had humiliated at his own dinner table. The man he had judged by his paycheck instead of his character. 2 weeks later, my father called me. It was the first time I'd heard his voice without that familiar confidence. "Mia," he said, "I need to say something." I let him speak. He told me he'd spent days in the hospital thinking about that dinner, about the wine glass, about the words he'd used, about Rowan sitting there listening. Then he said something I'd never expected. "I built my entire life around a scoreboard. Job titles, money, property, success. But there was one thing he had never measured: whether the people he loved actually felt safe sitting at his table." He paused, then his voice cracked. "Aiden saved my life." He took a breath. "I was wrong about him." Another pause. "I was wrong about you." I didn't cry, but I came close. He told me he wasn't calling to demand forgiveness. He knew he hadn't earned that, and I told him the truth. His apology didn't erase what happened. It didn't erase the way Rowan had looked at me that night. It didn't erase 6 years of feeling like I wasn't enough. But if he wanted a relationship with Rowan, it could happen slowly, on my terms. With effort, not one emotional phone call, years of showing up, just like I had once shown up for him. He agreed. And surprisingly, he kept his word. My father started coming to Rowan's school events. He never demanded attention. He didn't bring expensive gifts. He simply sat in the back and watched. The first time I saw him at Rowan's kindergarten concert, he didn't even try to approach me. He just watched his grandson sing 3 painfully off-key songs. When the performance ended, my father clapped louder than anyone. Then he quietly left. Later, he started asking Aiden about his work. And for the first time, he actually listened. Eventually, my father attended the fire department's recognition dinner where Aiden's crew was honored. He stood in the back of the room. Afterward, he shook Aiden's hand. "Thank you for my life." That's all he said. Aiden didn't need more. My mother apologized too. She admitted that her silence at that dinner had been its own kind of cruelty. Rose was different. She never apologized for laughing. She never accepted that anything had changed. Eventually, distance grew between her and the rest of the family. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't want revenge against her anymore. I'd finally learned something important. I didn't need to watch other people fall to know that I was standing. Aiden eventually became a fire department lieutenant. He still works long shifts. He still comes home exhausted. Sometimes he smells like smoke, but he's still the same man who once stayed late in my classroom because children needed someone to answer their questions. Rowan is 6 now. He doesn't remember much about that dinner. What he remembers is simpler. His dad is a hero. His grandfather comes to his concerts, and his mother loves him. That's enough. Sometimes, late at night, Aiden and I sit on our porch with cups of tea, and I think about that dinner. I used to believe that night was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. Now I see it differently. It was the night I stopped begging for approval, the night I stopped shrinking myself. The night I realized that my life didn't need to look impressive to someone else to be valuable. My father thought money made a person important. He thought my husband was poor. But when his heart stopped, money couldn't save him. His property couldn't save him. His status couldn't save him. The man he had called worthless did. And somehow, that wasn't even the greatest lesson. The greatest lesson was that I didn't need my father to finally understand my worth. I already had a family that did. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destroying someone. It's building a life so full of love, peace, and purpose that the person who once called you worthless eventually realizes how badly they misunderstood you. I didn't win because my father suffered. I won because I stopped needing him to tell me I mattered. If this story touched you, hit that like button and subscribe for more emotional revenge stories. And tell me in the comments, if you had been sitting at that dinner table, would you have stayed silent, or would you have finally said something?